And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the African American Athlete live stream. I'm Rickey Hampton, along with my co host, Michael Roberson, coming to you on a Sunday evening. Hope everybody had a great weekend. I know your bracket is jacked up, so I don't even have to ask about that because there's nowhere in the world you hit on all these teams. If you say you did, you lying. So we ain't gonna even go there with that. But we also Mike and I would like to welcome my great friend and the great writer Anthony McLean of the BASN newsroom. Tony, thank you so much for checking in with us, brother. We always love talking to you and getting your insights on the various goings on in the world of sports, guys. And let's just uh, start the evening off talking about the Final Four. We got the men's Final Four is set. The women's Final Four is in progress right now,
and tomorrow,
yeah, with semifinal games with regional final games tonight and tomorrow. Before we get that set, I think we got Miami and LSU going on right now, and we'll get on with some other topics. But some great games in the Final Four and the whole tournament. And we'll start with you, Tony, as our guest. Just your overall thoughts on the proceedings of this year's 22-23 NCAA tournament so far.
Well, it's definitely been fun to watch. I've probably been watching the women's games a little bit more than the men, but once they got to the Sweet 16, I was concentrating on the men a little bit more. Here, as I was telling you before the show, half the state of Connecticut is in martial law, and then the other half of the state is dancing because they were trying to get that double-double like they had a few years ago, but Ohio State and a bunch of turnovers had a lot to do with that.
Absolutely. As we all know, as you probably know, man, UConn, the ladies are knocked out, won't be in the Final Four for the first time in 14 years, I believe.
It's been a while.
That is an extraordinary an extraordinary streak, Mike, whether they would win it every time or not, to make 14 consecutive Final Fours. And I know you cover Stanford, and they had big hopes this season on the women's side and couldn't get it. They got knocked off early by Ole Miss. Did you cover that game, Mike?
Oh, yeah. And well, one thing about UConn, remember, UConn was their last Final Four appearance. They beat Stanford down in over in Minneapolis. So I was there for that one. But yeah, back to the Stanford situation. Now the whole year was kind of wacky because Stanford had a stretch down the last few games of the season where they were losing. I said, man, they're looking pretty vulnerable. And I remember I was doing a couple podcasts for one of these other outlets out here, and I said, I don't know. I said, even though I'm already set for the Final Four down in Dallas, Stanford might not be coming with me. And they were just really looking vulnerable, even though all those games are conference games, and conference games can go either way, but still, they just didn't have that je ne sais quoi that they usually have with Tara. So they won the first game pretty easily. Then they go up against Ole Miss and Coach Yo. And I actually had a good conversation with her. She's a sister from the Bahamas, and then she had her whole little thing when she was a player and finally got her great chance to coach Ole Miss in Oxford, which I was born like about a couple miles away from Oxford in a town called Taylor. So I mentioned that to her, and that got her kind of ingratiated with me, even though I wanted Stanford to win. But yeah, they upset them. Their defense was just treacherous on Stanford. And at Stanford, when they've had some of their downfalls, their outside shooting failed them. And that's Stanford's calling card has been great defense, and they usually can knock down those threes. So Ole Miss just had the combination going, even though Ole Miss is now eliminated, but still they had a good run in California. And so That was the thing
Yeah,
about it. That was the first time they lost in the first 2 rounds in a while too. So that was another. It was kind of like a weird situation. One or two of the greatest coaches ever in college basketball each had an early ending that is like unprecedented. So, and that's what I asked Power afterwards. I said, we were right in the middle of the pandemic, and you guys were nomads the entire year because Santa Clara County had a lockout where, that's Santa Clara County for Stanford and all the San Jose teams. So they were going through, have to play everywhere but on the farm and still won a national championship. And then last year, less restrictions, and they made it to the Final Four. This year, no restrictions really, and they're eliminated in the second round. So I asked her, I said, does that feel kind of weird? She said, I don't want to give the impression that we had a bad season, but it was, an unfortunate circumstance. But she said, I'm sure the men's team would love to be where we are right now. And I said, that could come across kind of wrong there because the men's team hasn't been a factor in many, many years. But that's what she said when I asked her about, the circumstance of the last 3 years.
But you know what, guys, and Tony, what I see from from this year's tournament, it's a lot of guys that can hoop that we don't know about. And, these kids may not be 4 stars, 5 stars, and all that, but these guys can ball, and with their 3-point shot in the NCAA tournament, and you get veteran teams like the Princeton team was mostly juniors and seniors out there playing. Mm-hmm. So these are 21, 22-year-old kids, young men, and that makes a difference. You get in there at a younger team. Number one, they know how to play. Number two, they ain't gonna be as intimidated. And the maturity factor, I think all that plays a role in some of these teams making the runs that they're making. And let's just look at Florida Atlantic. Your thoughts on what they've been able to do, Tony?
The thing is, we all know, let's see, with the NBA, it's tempo. You can tell the difference between a regular season game and a playoff game strictly by the defense. And it's even more magnified in the NCAA because it's a one and done thing. Because, the team that I've always felt that the team that can take the momentum can always win. I think that's why you saw the kind of upsets that you saw this year. And also you saw a lot of these comebacks like we saw today with Miami. Miami was pretty much dead in the water early on, but then they made a run. And look, we all know that, basketball is about runs, but it's just when you're able to literally and figuratively steal the tempo, it makes for that. I mean, the guard for Kansas, whose name escapes me right now,
Marquise Noel.
How he's not being mentioned in like player of the year things is crazy. And especially when, let's face it, college ball, even more so, it's guard oriented. If you have a tremendous guard, you will make a run. And if you look at the 4 teams, especially on the men's side, all of them have tremendous guard play. And to me, that's always going to make the difference.
Oh, and you mentioned Noel. I just love watching that kid play. His game against, who did they beat to get to Kansas State in the Elite Eight in the first game the other night? Against Michigan State.
Yeah,
20 points, 19 assists. That dude was dropping dimes all over the place.
Set a record. NCAA record.
Well, for me, yeah, and of course, Michigan State being and their plays really was indicative of what happened to me last week. We weren't on the air last week, but I was in pain last week. That's when Stanford lost, and then that's also when Marquette lost for the men's side. And those are my 2 winners that I had in my bracket. So my bracket got torpedoed this time last week. But Marquette, Shaka Smart. It was just so cool. He brought, he was in Virginia and before and all that. He was a darling in the NCAA, which stars are made in this March Madness. I mean, look at Finis Dembo, who we had on the show before. Remember, he became a star in Wyoming when he had a great run there. But Shaka and I brought this to Milwaukee, and Marquette was rejuvenated. And this was like the first time they were looking like a Final Four team since the Dwayne Wade years. So I was really hopeful for that, and that was more in my heart because, that's a team I covered a while ago and I'm from the area. But, when they lost and then Michigan State, took their thing there, I said, okay, well, maybe some of the Blue Bloods are going to be in the Final Four. But as we have it right now, the top seed in the Final Four is a 4 seed. Everybody else is below that. And it's like 5 or 9. So it's like amazing that we have this. And from a purist standpoint, you want everything to be chalk, but this kind of shows excitement. But I'm sure the NCAA is not too happy with this right here because for a rating standpoint. No. And you had teams from Texas that were supposed to be in the Final Four. Houston fell apart. Texas, as Anthony just mentioned, fell apart in this game against Miami. And Alabama, I'm sure they're somewhat relieved that Alabama's not there because you don't have to talk about the whole suspect situation and all that, with the murder that happened. And, that's a whole different diatribe. So I think some of those storylines NCAA is glad is not there, especially with Alabama. But I'm sure they would like to have seen Texas and Houston down there, just for the purposes of, hey, we're in H-Town and we got 2 of our schools represented. Instead, Florida, South Florida is being represented in the Final Four with Florida Atlantic and Miami.
Yeah, absolutely. As we look at some of the highlights from the Miami-Florida game, and we're going to get to this controversial ending in just a minute. But the kid from Miami, Wong, he played well for them last year in the playoffs. And another kid, Miller, who today was 7-7 from the field, and I think 12 of 12 from the field. He pitched a perfect game on the way to scoring 27 points. And this was a pretty – Miami's not bad, but some of these schools, like Princeton knocking off the teams they beat, if they played them in a series, they lose 4-1. Florida Atlantic, I couldn't see them beating Purdue in a series, but they beat them when they needed to that one time. And that's the beauty of this. That's the beauty of this tournament. As I said, it's some guys that can hoop. Just because you don't know their name, don't mean they can't play. And if you shortchange them, and Tony, watch these highlights really speak to what you were saying about the guard play.
Oh, it's we see it in the NBA now where it's more about the guards more so than the front court guard. But for the colleges, I mean, it's been like that for a while. And like you said, the great thing about the NCAAs is that it is it is truly, win or go home in that vein. But that's the excitement. That's the real excitement of it. I mean, you got Jim Larrañaga taking the second team to the Final Four. I mean, it was actually, I want to say, 11, 12 years ago to this day, where he took Georgia, where George Mason got beating UConn.
Yeah, but what do you guys think about the foul late in the game that sent the young man to the free throw line? We just saw him split two. The guy definitely got his hand on him and pushed him.
Right.
He didn't put
But he's in mid-air, Ricky. So even a slight nudge can alter everything.
It was a foul, but do you agree that the call should have been made?
I do.
Yeah. It's again. I go back to what I said earlier. it's sort of like the Super Bowl call. If that happens in, like, say, week 7 or week 8 of the regular season, it's like, oh, okay, whatever. But it happened, it happened in the Super Bowl, and in this instance, it happened in a game that was going to put somebody in or out of the Final Four, so it's going to be magnified. The officiating in college ball has been, I'll be nice and say it's inconsistent. I think it's worse in the colleges than it is in the pros, but it's just unfortunate that the timing of it more than anything else. But Mike's right. I mean, it was a foul. I mean, when end of the day, when you call in the letter of the law, it was a foul.
Yeah.
I mean, but think about this. Let's say if he would have fallen and hurt himself, guess what would have happened? They'd have gave him a technical foul, even though he said, "Hey man, I just barely touched him." But you know what happens on those plays. So they don't go by what happened preceding that. It goes by what happened afterwards, like with Gary Payton II last year. He's going to have to block the shot, but because he fell and basically broke his elbow, Dillon gets suspended. But he doesn't help by exacerbating it by being a jerk now, trying to be this villain. But at the time, he didn't have a bad reputation. It was basically he looked like he was trying to block Gary Payton II's shot. But when Gary Payton's end result was he fell trying to catch himself and mess up his elbow. And it's, oh, no, that's flagrant. But if you really look at it, all the contact was of him trying to block the shot.
I listened to the discussion with Clark Kellogg and that crew after the game on CBS.
And Barkley was against it.
And everybody agreed it was a foul.
Except Barkley.
I think one person, but one, I think the coach from the ex-Villanova coach, Coach Wright,
yeah,
his contention was, hey, you've been letting them play the whole game.
Yeah.
But no, Barkley was the one that was really against it, though. He was just trying to give the perspective of a coach, but he wasn't like he agreed with it. It was a foul, but he said he knows that as a coach, especially on the opposing team, he was like, "Come on, man, you're gonna call that now?" But that's natural. But Charles Barkley was like, "There's no way you should call that at this point in the game." And then he and Clark almost got into an argument because Clark was saying, "You can't sit here and pick and choose when that's a foul. It's a foul at any point, minute 1 or minute 40." So
a foul is foul. And not only that.
And that's that NBA influence because, guys have been barred, and, no NBA player has ever fouled anybody, as we all know. So it's like they want to get they want everything. But yeah, it's at the timing. Time, it's one of those things where if that's like, say, the 12th game of the season and they wind up losing, it's like, oh well, we'll get them, we'll come like this. But it's the game, it's the game that's going to take you from the Final Four or your season ends. So it's even more, it's more magnified. That's
one play. Because bottom line, Miami, Texas up, you up 13, man. You up 13 points with 8 minutes.
But Ricky, that's a different game though.
You got to finish that.
Yeah,
that was a different game.
That's it. Yeah. We're talking about the Creighton, Creighton game.
I know what I'm talking about. Right.
We got you. Hey,
that would really be a story.
After 16 weeks of hoops, they all start to run together after a while.
Well, you know what? Even though this seems to be a mid-major Final Four, what would really be intriguing, and definitely for Ricky and myself, would be if one of the HBCUs would have kind of slipped into there.
Absolutely.
Think about if it's in Houston and let's say Texas Southern would have made it. How big would that have been? So HBCU, I mean,
got a way to go, Mike.
This should be inspiration though, because some of these cats are coming from mid-major conferences, which are kind of on the same level as that. So I mean, you win the SWAC, you're gonna automatically get in. You need to go on a run like some of these guys have done. It could happen. I mean, Vivian Stringer with Cheney State. That's in the limelight now because of Don Staley wearing one of the players' uniform on the sideline.
That's a good point.
Think about it. what's the difference between FDU and Florida Atlantic and who were some of the other ones that had San Diego State?
Right.
You know, they're all quote unquote mid majors, and their facilities, I mean, aren't that much better. In some instances, they're worse than what some of the HBCUs have. It's unfortunately what winds up happening with the HBCUs is reputation, and maybe the best players aren't going there. Now, NIL can help a little bit, but all in all, there's still a long, I don't want to say it's a long way to go, but it's just, and we all have this argument every year. It's a commitment to the athletic department, how much of a commitment they want to make to athletics.
What you would have to have a basketball version of what Dion did with Jackson State, a guy that could come in and just throw a name out there. Say LeBron James said, after I retire, you know what? I'm going to go coach at Tennessee State and see what he could do in terms of recruiting the high caliber athletes there. Because, see, my contention is a lot easier to build a championship caliber basketball team than it is a football team, simply because of the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. you get
I guess the closest
great players.
Mm-hmm.
But think about this, though, Ricky. Think about this. At the time, it looked like it was about to happen because you had Eddie George coming in on the football side. You had Coach Penny, not Penny Hardaway, but the other Coach Penny in Nashville. But Master P's son was coming in there, and it looked like that was going to open up the floodgates for these star high school players to start coming down there. Then all of a sudden, it's like, hey, my son's not really playing. He's hurt. I don't know about these trainers. I'm pulling him out of here. So he's at another school now. And that pretty much messed it up for basketball-wise for TSU.
Mm-hmm.
But the last team that probably could have really done something like that was the Carlos Rogers teams in the mid-'90s or early 90s, because they actually dominated the OVC and went to the tournament, but they just would end up playing somebody like Kentucky. So that's what I'm saying, that if this was a year like now where the big names have been knocked off, who knows if they couldn't have snuck up in there and then somehow backed into a Final Four.
And we've seen glimpses of it. Todd Bozeman I thought Todd Bozeman did a tremendous job at Morgan. Mm-hmm. And Mike Davis, who we all remember, brought Indiana to a Final Four, had a great run at Texas Southern. It has to be sustainable. And also there, again, it goes back to the commitment to the ADs and most importantly, the coach, because you very rarely have what you have in North Carolina Central, where you have a guy like Mr. Moulton, who played there, knows the culture, and has come back to coach there and has been very, very successful. Although, like you said, Rick, you would think it would happen quicker in hoops than it would be in football, but for whatever reason, it hasn't.
Yeah, it hasn't, and as Mike said, there's always hope for that. And you mentioned Mike Davis, who's now the coach here in Detroit at U of D, and his son Antoine, who fell 3 points short of tying Pistol Pete's all-time scoring record. Yeah. And I love the kid, but young man, you were not cheated out of that opportunity to break his record. There was a story last week where Antoine was saying he felt cheated because U of D did not get invited to the CBI, which you have to pay to get into. And they were 14-19 on the year. And brother, you had 5 years to do it with Pete did. So dude, you didn't get cheated. You had a great career. He was an outstanding young player. But let that go, bro.
But Ricky, think about it. He missed that last 3 too. That would have tied it.
Yeah. and you
or broke it. Was that a tied or broke it?
He was tied.
Tied it.
And in your last game, you were 7 of 24. So
there you go,
bro.
There you go.
Yeah.
Come on now. Come on.
No, you below 500. You know, I mean, there's not too many people going to invite you anywhere.
Let that go. Because Pistol Pete was a bad man down in LSU. And Pistol was putting it up too. Hell, he was taking 30 shots a game.
He was averaging 40-something game in that one season. So
yeah, it was
pre 3-pointer too.
Right. Tag those onto what he did there. But anyway, much love for Antoine Davis, who had a great career at the University of Detroit. Hey man, but Tony, you're a great baseball writer, and we love talking baseball with you. But I wanted you on tonight, man, to help us discuss the passing of one of the icons of the NBA, and that is the great Willis Reed, who believe it or not, I think, guys, is somewhat underrated, even though he's a Hall of Famer, played in New York City, one of the best big men to ever do it.
And came out of
HBCU.
Came out of football dominant Grambling, but he was one of the preeminent basketball star from Grambling?
Absolutely,
man. And I think he was like when he was picked, he was like a 9th round draft pick or something. You know, our friend Ray Scott who played in the NBA. He was a 1st round draft pick, number 4 overall, in 1961 or 62. He was saying back then the NBA did not think guys from black colleges could play. That's why Willis went so late,
right?
Because they didn't think that he could play. They thought that in football. Like Deacon Jones was a 19th round draft pick when he came out. And we all know what Deacon Jones did. But the legacy, Tony.
But Ricky, that's why it's so amazing that Too Tall in 1974 is number 1 overall.
Out of
TSU. When you have that dynamic like that, like, okay, well, were they totally ignoring black colleges? But then how in the world was Ed Too Tall number 1 pick overall? And then, but ironically, he's not even in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So, I mean, out of the 2 TSU guys in the Hall of Fame, he's the one that was the highest projected. So,
well, you know, and that started changing. You had scouts like Bill Nunn over in Pittsburgh, and the brother over in
Kansas City,
who I can't think of his name, that brought in all those great scout, all those great guys like Otis Taylor, who recently passed away.
Yeah,
helped change the tune on that. But and actually, I'm looking at his name. Lloyd C. Wells was the black scout for the Kansas City Chiefs, who brought in Otis Taylor, Jim Marcellus,
Buck Buchanan,
Willie Lanier. Guys were great players for the Chiefs to help them win a Super Bowl. But back to Willis, your thoughts on his career and legacy and passing, Tony, and then I'll go to you, Mike.
Well, this was for us Knick fans, all 3 of us that are still left, that from a certain era, that was a death in the family Monday, hearing about Willis passing. He was my first favorite basketball player from growing up. The heart and soul of that first championship team, first Knick to have his number retired. And when you think about the great players that have played in New York, the fact that he was the first one to have his number go to the rafters says a lot. The funny thing is, their first round pick that year was a guy by the name of Walt Bellamy. Great player. He won, but the thing was, they him and Willis sort of clashed. It was sort of like when the Knicks had Ewing and Cartwright. They really couldn't play both of them together. So when Bellamy got traded, it was, a lot of people were upset that Bellamy got traded because he was the most ballyhooed guy. But in retrospect, it wound up being the greatest thing that ever happened to the franchise, because between Willis and then eventually Frazier, Bradley, DeBusschere, and another great HBCU legend, Dick Barnett, they wound up,
baby.
Oh, yep. Oh, they wound up getting that championship. But and everyone knows of the seventh game where he played hurt. I've always said the most 4 important points in Knick history were in Game 7 of the 70 finals. If Willis doesn't even come out there and doesn't hit those first 2 shots, they may not win that first title. And basically just having him come out there and having that presence, and then Walt basically took the game over and they wound up winning the title. But he's the captain. Whenever, all you got to do is say the captain, and everybody knows exactly who you're talking about. It's not Jerry Jeter. It's always Willis Reed. And the thing is, like you said, and we're even in looking at his highlights now, you're right, Rick. As great a player as he was, when they talk about like top centers of all time, Willis doesn't get that love that most people that he, I think he deserves. He was the first guy ever to win MVP for the regular season, for the All-Star game, and the NBA Finals. I think it's been done a few more times since then, but he was the first guy that did that. And again, just a presence in there. Now, if you compare to today, he would be considered a quote-unquote small size, undersized center. But ask Kareem, ask Wilt, ask Wes Unseld, and on and on and on and on. They all, Willis was the guy. I was lucky enough to interview him many, many years ago when I was writing for a newspaper. And, we're always told to don't meet your idols, but he was exactly what he was tremendous. And here's a little story. Now, I was covering a USBL game here in Connecticut, and he was scouting for the Knicks. And I was asking him who was the player he was looking at. He says, this kid here for this kid that was playing for, I guess it was the Long Island team, wind up being a guy by the name of Anthony Mason.
Anthony Mason, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who Mike and I covered in college.
Right.
Yes. Yep.
Well,
and he was a beast then too.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it, is that that Mason talked about that. Well, when Mason and I were talking one time, and I said, what's up with the Big East schools? He said, what happened? And he said that basically guys like Leonard Truck Robinson, and some of the old head guys were talking to him about going down to TSU when he had the ability to play for the Big East schools, but I'm not sure the grades or not. But he talked about that. And then, of course, with Willis having that influence, and then that's when Mason really got on track, because remember, he was bouncing around at first. He was on Portland, but never played, and in Denver and a couple other teams. But once he played on the Long Island Surf, that's when Willis Reed saw him, and also Pat Riley, and they brought him on there. And basically his game got transformed to more of an enforcer, because as I keep telling people, and Ricky knows too, when Mason was at TSU, he was a finesse player. He was a finesse player. And in 1988, he was the 3rd leading scorer in the NBA, in the college basketball, behind Hersey Hawkins, who had a tremendous year, 35 points a game. He had like a Pete Maravich type year. And then, of course, Queenan from Lehigh, before they got their star from Lehigh now, that's playing in where is he? Oklahoma City now? No, New Orleans Pelicans. So, before he became McCollum, before McCollum became the lone guy to make it from Lehigh, it was Queenan that was averaging 29 a game. in 1988, but it never materialized. And I remember that moment when Mason did get attached to the Knicks. I was in Cleveland. Well, I was in Pennsylvania, but I was covering the Cavaliers. And I remember the Knicks were coming to town. And I talked to Jim Jones, and people might say, who was that? If you remember the documentary they did on the Lakers about that 1979-80 season, Magic's rookie year, Jim is in that documentary too, because he was on that team. He was actually the starting power forward, partially because of the whole Spencer Haywood controversy. So he said, I said, hey, check this out, Jim. I got my guy from college that's, on the Knicks, and they're coming to town. He said, all right, come over here and spend a weekend with me. I'll get you hooked up. And I got a chance to talk to Mason. I just told him how proud I was. And then next thing you know, he blew up into this big star. And we would, commensurate every time he would come around. I would have him on my shows and all that kind of stuff. So I remember that moment when he finally got attached to the Knicks. And some people think that Pat Ewing didn't like that he was more of a folk hero with the Knicks than Pat was. And Pat always felt like he never got his due.
Mm. It's funny. Just one thing.
Go ahead, Tony.
It's funny because basically him and John Starks sort of came up the same way, like you were saying, Mike, where they did a lot of time, either CBA or USBL or what have you, and they both sort of shined at the same time, and it basically came down to they weren't going to keep both of them, and it was just a matter of which guy were they going to keep. And it wound up being Starks, and Mason eventually would get traded to the Hornets, if I remember correctly. And, that's still one of the top 5, bonehead moves of the franchise, because Starks basically got all that cash and never really materialized afterwards. Now Mason, he wound up, being around in the league for a while, but I always felt like Mason was the guy. But again, that's just 2 hours. That's just the Knick fan in me just whining and moaning about some other silly moves along the way.
Right. And because when you talked about the 4 points, important 4 points in Knicks history, we're talking about somebody that made the most bricks in Knicks history. That was very, very important when the Knicks were on the precipice of winning in '94. And he shot them out. And
I still have flashbacks.
Exactly.
I put it this way: I've always said if Doc Rivers didn't tear up his knee that year, they win the title. But again, that's just me and the 4 other Knick fans left in the country that are still lamenting about '94.
We picked up another fan. It was 3-4, Tony.
Well, I'm gonna add my dog because he has to root for him.
But you know what though? However, I kind of blame Pat Riley, and I was telling people, I said, you guys realize that Pat had 4 losses when he was in LA. Everybody talk about how a genius he was. He had 4 losses, and he ended up losing that one. So he was like, his record wasn't that great in the finals, even though he was getting considered this guru, but he did not even have the wherewithal to either put in Hubert Davis or Orlando Blackman. I'm like, well, you take this dude out, he's killing you guys. He can't hit the side of the barn. Get these guys in here that can at least be steady. Remember, Hubert's jumper helped catapult them into the finals, because remember, Scottie Pippen fouled him. Mm-hmm. Scottie Pippen fouled him across the wrist, but
don't tell Scottie that. But that's
exactly. But and they try to blame Hugh Hollins, but if you look at the replay, he hits him right across the wrist. Hubert Davis had it like this. Yeah. So I was just mad at Pat Riley. I'm like, look, you guys are up 3-2. Okay, Pat's kind of injured, not really doing much, but still, you guys are up 3-2 with the momentum. You're going back to Houston. Take this dude out. He's not hitting any shots. Get him out. Don't worry about his pride or his psyche. You guys could go on the parade on Fifth Avenue and talk about, all right, I know, John, I know you're upset that I benched you, but it was for the better of the team.
Mm-hmm. I've never heard my brother cuss so much in a 2-hour span as it was that night.
Yeah.
Hey, Tony, I know you got to get out of here, man. but just your final thoughts on Willis, and please let people know how they can read you and follow you on BASN.
Well, again, for Nick fans of a certain generation, he was the guy. As much as we love Clyde, as much as we love Dollar Bill and DeBuscher and Pearl and all those guys, Willis was the guy. He was always the guy. He was forever the captain because of his contributions on and off. You talked to Walt Frazier. He embraced him from day one, coming from, small school, and, helped him develop on and off. I mean, in many ways, I guess you could sort of blame Willis for the Clyde persona to a certain extent, but that's another 2-hour story in and of itself. But he was just that, he was that rock. He was that first building block that turned the franchise around, because for so long they never had a true center, and it was exacerbated a certain night in Hershey, Pennsylvania, back in '62, and then eventually years later, like I said, we got Bellamy, and then they wound up getting Willis, and it took a little while, but it did change the fortunes of the franchise. But yeah, just his persona, just his contributions on and off. He's missed. He's going to be missed. Now, the sad thing is we've lost a few folks from that championship team. Dave DeBuscher passed away not too long ago. Even Hawthorne Wingo, one of the folk heroes from that team, passed away as well, and Dean Meminger as well. But Willis was always, forever the captain, pretty much. That's the thing with him. And again, he's going to be missed something fierce by a lot of us.
All right, so Ricky, before he signs off, for me, my perspective, of course, I was really, really young when they won that championship. So for me to sit here and say that I was cognizant of it wouldn't be true. But of course, I do remember glimpses of when the Bucks won with Kareem earlier. But I remember also thinking about this tournament. Remember, he used to coach Creighton.
Yes.
Yeah, he was a coach for Creighton, so that's what I kind of remember him. And I remember him saying, "The great Willis Reed," then they would always show the highlight of him hitting that jumper, those 4 points. And I never got a chance to interact with him. I think I might have seen him in passing when he's been part of organizations, the NBA team.
Benoit Benjamin, right? Wasn't that Benoit Benjamin? Wasn't that the first guy he had there?
Yeah, Benoit Benjamin. Yes. That was a big, exactly. That was a big deal about how he's being coached by this legend of Willis Reed, right? So yeah, and then when you talked about meeting your idols, and for me, of course, it was the same Jim Jones who introduced me to the Iceman, and then I met Dave Parker, my favorite baseball player, when he was a batting coach for the Cardinals. Now Matt Calvin, who's on with us, makes me not really want to meet Lynn Swann now, because he told about when he was the AD over at USC, his alma mater, that he discontinued some kind of program that was helping minorities. So that really kind of soured me on Lynn Swann, and that was my favorite all-time football player. So I know what you mean by, when they said that if you meet your idols, it can be catastrophic. But I'm 2 for 2 so far with Swann. With Ice and Dave Parker, Ice and Cobra.
That's good. And he should be in Cooperstown too, by the way. That's another 2-hour conversation in and of itself.
Yes.
Well, Tony, hey, thank you, man. Like I said, I don't want to keep you, but we got to get you back on.
Sure.
A little baseball.
Can I just give one baseball thing?
Absolutely.
I'm going to stick my neck out. The Baltimore Orioles will win the American League East this year.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah, we got to get you back on to finish.
Why did they just come out of nowhere and do that?
Well, we only got 10 more minutes.
I'll say it when I'm back on. I'll let you know why. I gotta build up some excitement,
Yeah, but okay, you know what? Well, what we haven't done, real quick, Ricky. What's your thoughts of Dusty finally winning it?
So happy. So glad. I mean, he was a Hall of Famer anyway.
Yes.
All this does now is just leaves absolutely, positively, no doubt. And here's the thing. They got a good chance to repeat. Yes, they lost Verlander, but they go out and get Abreu from the White Sox. And you've got to know that Garcia is going to take it to an even greater level this year. At the very least, they're going to repeat as a division title. Now, with the World Series, still got to get some things in, but you got to look at them as contenders at the very least this year.
Tony, now I got one more for you. I'm sorry, because I really wanted to get your thoughts on the Lamar Jackson situation. As we know, that Lamar Jackson had the exclusive franchise tag put on him by the Baltimore Ravens. He hadn't got any kind of offers yet. And we see, guys, the dawning of the black quarterback is here in the NFL. You think about upcoming draft, top 3 quarterback prospects are all black men. But your thoughts on Lamar and what's going on in Baltimore? And then we'll let you go, for real.
Yeah, okay. First of all, Ravens management, be careful what you wish for, because the minute he leaves town, you become irrelevant. You don't, with all due respect to Mr. Hundley, if he's your plan B, then you might as well start preparing for the 23 draft. Then, if that's the case, I think he's played his last game with the Ravens. The sad thing is I feel like there's Jack Morris type collusion going on with him, because how can a Daniel Jones get paid and Lamar and Lamar not? I mean, it's again, I don't want to go too crazy, but even with the emergence, even with the Soul Bowls this past year with Hurts and Mahomes, and I say this every year going into the NFL, if we could go through a season where black quarterbacks are still not looked upon with a jaundiced eye, then I'll know the league is different. I mean, yes, it was great that we had 2 brothers in the Super Bowl this year, but unfortunately, it's the mindset still. The mindset is still there. I mean, Baker Mayfield gets handed the job in Tampa, and literally an MVP, basically 50 to 70% of your offense, and you still don't want to pay him.
But they said they offered him a
you know what?
A good deal.
It's always, well, we did this and we did that. No,
they did that with Kaepernick. They said the same thing with Kaepernick.
Exactly. It's come up with a different lie, okay? Just make up a different lie. The dog ate my homework, something, because it's the same lie. It's the same backwards talking that we. I mean, what my question is, what is your plan B?
Mm-hmm.
That's to me, that's the main question. What's your plan? If and when he leaves, what is your plan B? I don't understand.
Do you guys think he should have an agent?
I don't have a problem with that, because see, and again, I guess this is from the Connecticut roots. People forget Ray Allen negotiated his contracts the majority of his career. We've seen it happen with guys without agents, but see, they want it both ways. They'll say, well, you should have an agent, but then they want to ridicule guys like Master P when he's with Ricky Williams. So it again, it just plays into that narrative. I don't care if Boo Boo the Fool is his agent. He should be one of the top 5 paid quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Yeah.
I agree.
Mike?
Yeah. I think it's a travesty, and then it's also insult. And then you talked about other guys getting money. I mean, Jimmy G And all the stuff he's been through, he's a starting
Oh, God.
quarterback in Vegas now. And and then the whole Baker Mayfield thing. I mean, first of all, the whole him being number 1 pick overall with all that scrutiny going on with the crotch grabbing, getting tackled by the police, stuff like. Remember, Tunsil is now getting his comeuppance, but remember, he was totally destroyed because of the face mask with the weed. That was like tragic. He's losing millions of dollars, but this
and the sad thing, Mike and Rick,
fool gets
they're going to do the same
tackled
thing. They're going to do the same thing with these kids that are going to come through this draft. It just happens way too many. Why do these guys still have to keep jumping through hoops? When you see, the fact that the Bears were even thinking about trading, my man from Ohio State.
Justin Fields.
The fact that they were even thinking about trading him is such an insult.
That's why they're the Bears, man.
But I'm just saying. It's that whole thing that permeates. Look, I get it. The kid for the Raiders was awful.
Marcus Russell.
Yeah, but
and so what? He's and
that's my point. And see, that's my point. For every Jamarcus Russell, there's a Ryan Leaf.
Yeah.
And so on and so now, they keep holding up Baker Mayfield like he's this whatever, and he'll still be he'll be allowed to be as mediocre as humanly possible. Him, the Blaine Gabberts of the world, and to an extent Jimmy G. I mean, yeah, Jimmy G got to a Super Bowl. So did Trent freaking Dilfer. Okay. So it's bothersome that even that we are still having these conversations in 2023 in regards to black quarterbacks.
And it's okay if these guys don't pan out, because everybody doesn't pan out. And that's my contention, with the offensive coordinator from the Chiefs, the brother.
That's a 2-hour story in and of itself.
Who couldn't get a job. He got to leave and go to DC, where they ain't got nothing to work with there,
right,
to try to prove himself.
And not only that, Ricky,
with
play
Josh
under a guy.
McDaniels, people hard. How many jobs Josh McDaniels?
Yeah, but the thing with Bieniemy, you have to do a lateral move.
Eric Bieniemy.
Eric Bieniemy. Yeah, you got to do a lateral move to play under a guy that's been questionable himself as a Bears defensive player. He's from the great Bears team that keeps him with his job, but what has he really done?
Exactly.
As coach. And then you got to go from Andy Reid to him, and he's going to be basically your report to guy, and then they're going to have you be an offensive coordinator on a team that has really no offense, especially at quarterback.
Their offense is offensive to offense as it is. And
all think about
this. Think about this, guys. 2 years ago, Byron Leftwich was the offensive coordinator for the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Exactly.
2 years later, he couldn't even drive a bus in Tampa at this point in time right now. Yep. And that happens. I mean, I still see what's my man in Green Bay who
Ray Rhodes.
No, the offensive coordinator there for years.
Sherman Lewis.
Sherman Lewis never was able, and then they browbeat him for 5 years, and then he's too old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
We got to get it.
Let me just start on this real quick. So think about this. We just mentioned 2 offensive coordinators that won Super Bowls, right? But didn't get a job. The one that just lost the Super Bowl got a job immediately. The offensive coordinator for Philly.
Kyle Shanahan is still riding off the coattails of his daddy.
I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, so will Lamar sign that franchise tag, guys?
No, I think he's played his last game at the. I think he's played his last game with the Ravens. I don't know. I would personally, I would love to see him go to some place like Atlanta, or I mean, to me, the perfect fit for him would have been the Jets, but the Jets basically want to bring Frank Serpico back to New York, so
wow.
Wow, they got to give a certain age to know that one.
Oh yeah, right down to the haircut. Mike,
they could turn to that if this thing keeps dragging out. They could turn to that. Hey, but I got to get out of here now because it's 10 o'clock. Tony, I owe you, man, because I know you need to get out of here. I appreciate you sticking around.
Anytime you guys ask me to come, I'm totally honored. I truly appreciate it. Totally appreciate it every time.
All right. For Mike Roberson, Tony McLean, read him at the BASN Newsroom, BASNnewsroom.com, right?
BASNnewsroom.com, exactly.
Absolutely. I'm Rick Hampton.
And the African American athlete will be in Dallas next week. I'll be down there.
There you go.
Okay.
Have a good one, guys.
Later, guys.